And now we take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe. President Bola Tinubu has described the $280 billion economic trade partnership growth between Africa and China as exponential. Speaking on Thursday in Beijing at the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation (FOCAC), Tinubu underscored the value of the trade volume between Africa and China, saying it shows deep economic relationship and expanded integration. The Nigerian leader told the forum, which included Chinese President Xi Jinping and other African leaders, that the flourishing economic partnership trade between Africa and China has grown exponentially, reaching an estimated $280 billion. He highlighted China's consistent demonstration of commitment to Africa, describing it as high-level engagement that has yielded strategic agreement and shared vision of growth. In his remarks, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced a $50 billion financial support for Africa in addition to military aid. The Chinese president said China appreciated its ties with African nations, stressing that both should rally their populations together to become a powerful force and write a new chapter in global peace, prosperity, and progress. All right, Vimbai, is it time to write this new chapter in global peace, prosperity, and progress? Your take on this story?
Well, my take on this, I think there's so many angles to dissect this. But one thing that intrigued me is I decided to delve into the history between Sino-African relations. And it dates back to the 1400s when Chinese Naval Admiral Zheng He first came to Africa on a trade mission. So he visited Somalia, Tanzania, Kenya, well, as they were known at the time. And several trade posts were established. And that's where Sino-African relations began. One major thing that stands out for me is that even though Chinese presence has been on the African continent since the 1400s, they were never a colonial power. So, to me, it indicates that there is room for a mutually beneficial, mutually respectful relationship. However, one now needs to ask, what do we need to do as Africans to ensure that we are not taken advantage of? Because, of course, there's now a stigma attached to China, Chinese investment, Chinese loans, Chinese, especially when we use the word debt trap. Of course, there's also the global hegemony play that's happening, where Africa once again is being used as a proxy as China, Russia, the West battle out for global dominance. However, at the end of the day, the ball is in our court as Africans. When we take these debts, are we being responsible with them? How are we structuring our affairs internally? Of course, we're still very fresh out of the incident that happened with Ogun State government and the Zhongshan company of the Chinese. But the question is, at the end of the day, locally, domestically, how are we managing our relationships with Africa? And with regards to Nigeria and the interaction from President Bola Tinubu, some great MOUs were signed. Of course, Nigeria has now joined the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a massive milestone. And then we've also seen deals signed for nuclear energy. And for those of us in media, exciting to see some cooperative deals with regards to media and broadcasting. However, for me, I was a little bit concerned that we're not seeing enough enough deals that promote export out of Nigeria into China as, of course, one of the biggest markets in the world.
Absolutely.
Okay. China's contemporary engagement with the rest of the world, particularly the developing countries, is within the rubric of what is called the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, or the New Silk Road project, where China tries to partner with about 150 countries all over the world. And that was launched in September 2013 by this same, President Xi Jinping. And African countries have tried to take advantage of that. So it is interesting to hear President Tinubu saying, look, partnership between Africa and China is now up to the tune of about $280 billion. Well, the question that President Tinubu raised, speaking as ECOWAS chairman, and expressing the sentiments of African countries, is that the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, will seem to reflect the aspirations of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Well, I don't know how that is true. Second, he said that the relationship between China and African countries is based on mutual trust and respect. again, you could put a question mark there. But he made a good point when he stressed the importance of a multipolar world, of a multilateral world, as opposed to a protectionist world, where countries are insular. And all his points about cooperation for mutual development purposes, I think no one can argue with that. However, the thing to note is that when African countries rush to China for this forum every year, I hope that the leaders of Africa that go there, they open their eyes to see what it means to have cooperation leading to development and what leadership means. Many of them are having train projects. I hope they have seen the rail line between Beijing and Shanghai. I hope they have seen the infrastructure. I hope they have seen, what it means to run a country. That's one lesson. Two is that African leaders are quick to rush to China every other year to go and have this forum. When are we going to have FOCAC in one of these African countries so that the Chinese too can come here and see, that this is a relationship that is truly based on mutual trust and respect. The third part of it is that many of these African countries lack the capacity to engage China. In some of the countries, the West is moving out, Nigeria particularly. Some of the Western investments here are being moved out. But do we have the capacity? The lessons in this regard will be the lesson from Zambia, the lesson from Djibouti, the lesson from Kenya, countries that are heavily indebted to China. China, on account of that, being accused of debt trap diplomacy. But however, those who disagree with that argument cite what they call the Angola model. They cite what they call the UNAM model in terms of how it is beneficial. Now, let me talk about Nigeria and China, because this was, again, another part of this visit. President Tinubu met with Lin Qiang, that's the premier, and he also met with President Xi Jinping before the opening ceremony. And what President Xi Jinping was saying is that China's relationship has been elevated to a level of a comprehensive partnership. Lin Qiang, the premier, also echoed the same thing, saying that, look, China is willing and ready and to promote business interests in Nigeria in all sectors, agriculture, education, health, and all of that. Now, we heard the same thing in 2016, 2017, when President Buhari was invited on a state visit to China. And China at that time, in fact, promised investment in Nigeria worth about $60 billion over time, with several MOUs signed. What happened to those MOUs? Those MOUs, many of them, there was no follow-up. They never got off the table, and Nigeria could not take advantage of the opportunity. The few Nigerian companies that came to, the few Chinese companies that came to Nigeria suffered as a result of our inconsistency. Those who are listening to me should go and check the relationship of, I think it's called HEDA Sinopec in petroleum, CCGC in the Mambila project, and other businesses that are in Nigeria, CNOC, and all of these companies have stories to tell. Another classical example is the case of the Chinese, company in Ogun State. I hope President Tinubu will seize the opportunity of this visit to look at ways, or a political, diplomatic way of resolving some of those abandoned MOUs. We are signing new MOUs. Those new MOUs, if you don't follow them up, you won't get any result. The diplomacy that President Tinubu talks about. We don't have an ambassador in China. We don't have an ambassador in US. We don't have in UK. We have not appointed any ambassadors. We are signing MOUs. There are no foot soldiers on the ground in those countries to follow up for us at the diplomatic level. That's the big question they still need to address.
Right, so the forum was established in the year 2000, and for the last 24 years, this is the 8th meeting of the forum, and they actually switch destinations. So last destination was in Senegal in Africa, whilst this one is in China. They meet every 3 years, except in 2021 when it was virtual as a result of COVID. However, as has been already dissected, most times when they meet, even though it was largely the motivation for this forum came about by African persuasion, including the involvement of the AU, China has played a big brother role at these meetings. And so this year, no difference there. So let me just break it down into the good, the bad, and, well, I won't use the word ugly, but not so good. The good is, of course, the investments that have been highlighted. We have opportunities to receive aid, foreign aid from China, to go into areas like infrastructure development, to go into areas like health, agriculture, also look at the environment and other aspects of things. And we've seen that consistently in recent years. In fact, some critics have said that China uses some of these fora with African countries as a silent face-off with the West. So the US, America, as we've seen in recent times, there's been that rush for Africa. Africa is the golden, shall I say, golden goose, or the one who is a critical factor in the silent face-off. Now, beyond the infrastructure, let's now look at what is, what's not so good, the bad. So the bad aspect of things are some of the things that have been talked about. We talked about the loan defaults. What critics have said, or what has been observed in recent times, that some of the loans that have been given to these countries are stringent in terms of their conditions. Even though China is a big proponent of not attaching political criteria to loans given. For instance, the US would give loans, or Western countries would give loans and attach certain conditions. China is for, you shouldn't have to dictate to a sovereign nation what they should do based on the amount of money you want to give them as loan. Nevertheless, despite this moral position, they still give conditions that are neck-breaking, and then when this happens, they're able to move into these nations and seize critical assets. Case in point, what Nigeria is currently facing, and I'm glad we'll be having that conversation later on in the show. The other part of it, of course, is that China has also been accused of environmental degradation in countries like Mozambique, Uganda, Zambia, logging, going in there and just destroying the environment, or when they go in there to have projects, not being able to look at the environment. And very critically as well, before I go, is a factor, and I'm trying to, very critically, before I go, is talking about access to raw materials. That's the thing. Access to raw materials, because by giving these incentives, loans, deals with African countries, they also look to lobby for more access to raw materials. We know the case of Zimbabwe, the mines in Zimbabwe. We have the mines in other countries on the African continent where China has deepened its influence and entry. In fact, in some countries, what they're asking for is that when they come to mine these materials, can they refine them in the raw materials in the country, so that at least it creates more jobs, it creates an opportunity, and it benefits the host nation in itself. The not so good, of course, finally, is the fact that we keep going to these nations almost cap in hand. 53 African countries, African representatives in China for the summit, and we keep asking, what is in it for Africa? What is in it for the countries who go there? It always seems like this country who invites us for deals like the Saudi Arabia, France, the United States, end up having the bigger or better part of the deal, better end of the deal.